Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the Above the Bar podcast, where each week we belly up to the bar with a new guest, find out what they do, who they are, and what makes them great. So sit back, relax, and enjoy. Alrighty, folks. Welcome back to the Above the Bar podcast. It's your host, Sean. We are bellying up to the bar. We're talking about one of my favorite subjects today. I love sci-fi. We have brought in, you got to do it. You got to do it right. You got to get a historian, someone who knows the gig, someone knows about it, not just, the movies or the comic books, but a true historian. So we've taken that opportunity today. We brought somebody up to the bar. He's going to introduce himself real quick. We've got, and so I can put it out there now. You need to go right now. You got to go check out sci-fihistory.net. Go check it out. We've brought to the bar Mr. Ed Zimmerman. All right, and that's done, Ed. That's all. That's all you get. Welcome to the bar, brother.
I'm thrilled to be here. Thanks for having me. That was a great intro.
And folks, this is Ed's first live podcast. The first one. He said thousands upon thousands of a couple of people have asked him to come on, but he decided that this would be the place where he would make his podcast debut, bellying up to the bar with us. Look at that. I mean, the tears, they're everywhere. They're streaming down. So we thank you for this opportunity for you to come on with us and for us to be your first one, brother.
Thanks for having me.
So as always, we gotta go ahead and take care of a little bit of housekeeping before we get into talking. And for those of you, I'm gonna put it out there right now. I'm spoiling Dune only because the book's only been around since like 72 or something like that. It's 70 something, or maybe 76. I have to look it up.
Yeah, we'd have to look that up.
So if you ain't figured it out by then, I can't help you. I really can't. The first movie, well, really the third movie, has been around since 84. So figure it out, folks. But I don't know. Did you like all your pictures you saw that were up there this week there, Ed?
Yeah, everything was good.
So
everything was very good.
So that's all being done by Dibs. That's Media by Dibs. He's a good friend of mine, another Marine, but he sponsors us. And Media by Dibs, your connection for all things media, from logos to marketing campaigns to flyers and more, making your ideas a reality. Mention the phrase belly up to the bar for 10% off your first order and for free consultations. And they are a veteran owned and operated business also.
Well, that's awesome.
So there you go. There you go, Ed. So you can go find Dibs. Look, he's already on talking about Let's Go. So you can go find Dibs. Maybe, he can get you. He does all that on his own. It's pretty impressive, the stuff he does for me. I have no savvy at all with those things, but he does it. Also, another thing we do, you got stickers for Sci-Fi History yet there, Ed?
I don't have any merchandise yet. I've had, I quoted some things around to a couple of different places, but my readership continues to grow, so I keep getting requests for things. The biggest requests tend to be either computer stickers or T-shirts. So I haven't. I've kind of said maybe next year I'll do it because I'm looking at some other things I need to do later this year in preparation for some site changes next year.
Nice. Well, we do. Once you got a sticker, we do what's called sticker and a cause. That's this board behind me. And what that is if you have sci-fihistory.net, you have anything going on, somebody can send me the sticker, send me a little write-up on it, send me a message. I'll go ahead and I'll read it live on the air, and I put their sticker up there. But this week we got a little special treat. So we're going to be if you happen to find your way on the right coast and off the left coast, come out to Albany Comic Con on November 14th. We're going to be broadcasting live, and we got new stickers. Got new stickers up, folks.
Whoa, look at there.
And for all the times that we've had the drag queens on, my daughter made a sticker of me inside of a martini glass in drag. I don't dress in drag, but I thought it was funny enough that it needed its own sticker. And
Well, it's things you have to do for your art, right? It's
that's
not
it. It's
like
for your art.
anything other than that. That's
Uh,
sweet.
and these are, I will tell you, talk to Dibs. He can help make your stuff for you. But if you're looking for stickers, I'll plug them because they were great. Sticker Mule. Sticker
Cool.
Mule is so cheap. Like I got all these done in a week, and they actually have people that can help you. But we also have bar coasters made. Can't be at
those are
the Above the Bar podcast if you ain't got bar coasters. And yes, Dibs, I will make sure that I get a good address and get those sent out to you.
Huh.
Sticker Mule is amazing. So there's a little bit of our housekeeping, folks. Like I said, we've got some things coming up here November 14th. All that being said, all that being done, we got to get into talking sci-fi. So your site, again, check out Ed's site, sci-fihistory.net. Going on to the site, let's start with that for a second, Ed.
Mm-hmm.
What all can they get out of your site?
Wow, that's a big question to answer. That if you go to sci-fihistory.net, what I call the main page, you're going to see a traditional blog setup. And what I do is I'll do movie reviews. I'll do occasionally I'll do book reviews. I'll do television show reviews, or I'll do news blurbs. Sometimes I do shout outs, what I call sci-fi shout outs to other websites or other products, or if I stumble on something on the web that I think science fiction and fantasy fans would like to see. Yeah, there you've got it up. My review from just earlier today. I'll kind of do what I call on the main page. I call them public service announcements or reviews. And usually, what happens, I'll get like anybody else who's doing reviews on the web. I'll have production companies and distribution outlets contact me. They'll want to send me their DVDs to review. They'll want to send me occasionally books. I've shied away because there are so many outlets right now for books and book reviews. I've shied away from doing many of those. Instead, what I'll do is I'll encourage readers who contact me or swap me messages through Twitter. I'll encourage them to say, hey, submit a review, because I'm more than happy to kind of serve in that editorial role and publish it on my site. If you also publish it on your own site, I'll do promotion for you, similar to what you do when you're having someone on, and send notices via Facebook and Instagram and Twitter, just to promote. My thing on that main page is just to promote anything related to science fiction, fantasy, and occasionally horror. Now, within the website, every day of the year has its own page. And if you go to, as an example, on January 1st, pull up January 1st, you will see any birthdays of people or persons associated to science fiction, fantasy, and or horror. You'll find just a little citation about them. You'll find some graphics I've put together about them. After the birthdays, I do movie announcements, and the movie announcements are films or video releases that have come out on that day anywhere around the world. So, for example, if a good example for television is Doctor Who on December 25th, for a number of years there in a row, they would do that Christmas special, right? It'll play typically worldwide on December 25th. But sometimes they'll do a small repeat with a country in Europe. They'll do that on maybe January 3rd. When you go beyond movies, and the next section is television, and that's where I'll list TV shows that have played the dates, for January 1st on January 1st, anywhere in the world that I've been able to locate the broadcast information.
Now, fantasy. I hear a lot of.
What's that?
How about fantasy?
Yeah, science fiction, fantasy, and horror. typically any of those. Now, every now and then, I get somebody who will send me an email saying, "Well, why do you do horror films?" Why? And I typically I explain it as I don't do traditional horror films that would fall into like slasher categories. I'll do stuff that toys
Well,
with the
Alien is
idea that there are different levels of reality, there are different levels of experience, and that would involve ghosts, that would involve demons, so on and so forth. So I'll put those in because again, that dividing line between science fiction, fantasy, and crossing over into horror does get very blurry. So
yeah.
for that reason, I'll include a lot of those releases and a lot of those stars and a lot of those writers in those spaces. Again, after that, I when I can find the information, I'll celebrate related sci-fi, fantasy, and/or horror video games. I'll lodge them as well, so that way I'm kind of acknowledging their existence in the chronology of things. But it's honestly an exhaustive website. It's tons and tons of data that that someone can invest time in to really bone up on their sci-fi, fantasy, and horror trivia. Um, I don't have any headset available here.
Yeah, I'm just getting a little bit of feedback on the side there. So I was just trying to see if you had any
Hmm.
headphones there. Just didn't want to interrupt what you were saying. I just figured
Sure, sorry about that.
I figured I'd throw it up in the corner. Just a little bit of feedback. So I mean, really, it sounds like anything somebody wants to get into, it's in there. Now, do you have a favorite medium for sci-fi? Like growing up as a kid, you have the history of the 10-cent war. I've talked about on here, which is the comic book side where comic books were demonized
Right.
for, you couldn't. That's why like the character Mobius that's getting ready to be in the movies is the living Mobius, the living vampire, because at that time you couldn't have undead people the same way. So they made Mobius into a vampire that wasn't dead.
Okay.
So you have stuff like that. So is there any particular medium where you're like, I really prefer, or I mean, or do you even go back to the old school um, radio broadcast, like the War of the Worlds and and past there? Is there a particular genre or medium? Like I said, medium of sci-fi that's your wheelhouse. This is what you really dig.
I'm open to any and all. You will see on my site, if you look at those individual day pages, you'll see where I've cited comic books that have been released. You'll see where I've cited trivia as to, let's say, DC Comics. If you kind of peruse the web, you'll see that there are dates that DC Comics says, oh, Diana Prince of Themyscira was technically born on this day in our continuity. Let's say that's August 1st, just for sake of argument.
Arbitrary.
I'll put on August 1st that this is her universally acknowledged birthday. So I'll cover comics to a certain degree. I do cover radio programming, the old time radio shows when I can find their broadcast information. They're a little tougher, especially with my personal favorite, The Shadow.
Classic. Now, would you call The Shadow sci-fi?
It's fantasy.
Okay.
Yeah, it's definitely fantasy because he's using a science, what I would call a science, in manipulating the minds of people around him so that he can fight crime or take a stand against evil, so on and so forth. So it definitely falls into that kind of niche area where, as I said, sci-fi and fantasy and/or horror will overlap. It's just it's natural that because of that overlap, I mention it somehow. It's what fans expect. and it's what I try to promote. As I say, I try to consider myself the hardest working man in sci-fi, fantasy, and horror, which means I've got to go that extra mile.
Right.
I've got to try and push a little bit more. Doesn't mean I like it all, because there are certainly some properties, quite frankly, I can't stand. But I still list them.
Wait, are you willing to say which one it is?
You know, I will say I've never been very fond of the Stargate property. You know,
Really?
The three different series. Of the three, I like the last one, Stargate Universe, more because it seemed more relatable to me.
Wow.
The original Stargate and Stargate Atlantis, what I've seen of them, I'm actually through season 2 of Stargate. I'm watching it now on streaming. On the weekends, I'll watch a few episodes here and there just to kind of familiarize myself with it and to be able to talk about it. My problem with it is largely the writing was what I call saccharine. It was just a little too sweet and cutesy. And I think because so many storylines obviously were independent detached from their ongoing mythology.
Yeah, they were all one shots.
Yeah, exactly. The X-Files, I think, is the only show in the history of sci-fi and fantasy that's kind of successfully navigated that short form and long form storytelling.
Star Trek.
Well, yeah, Star Trek, but Star Trek doesn't. They don't have a lot of long form stories. In at least not in the Star Trek, The Next Generation, Deep Space Nine, Voyager, and Enterprise. Now, the current iterations, Star Trek Discovery, Star Trek Picard, I just, quite frankly, I think they're awful writing. Awfully written.
A lot of people love Picard.
What's that?
Picard's very popular.
Picard is very popular, but it's one of those things where if you grow up knowing a character, mm-hmm. and then they decide we want to do something completely radically different with the character, I find that exceedingly difficult to get into. Because it's too significant a change. That doesn't mean I don't embrace the fact that the character gets older and maybe takes on a little different baggage as he gets older. There are just so many things about Star Trek Picard that seems antithetical to the world of Star Trek as a whole. I just see it as a completely different universe of storytelling. It's almost like I originally said when I was talking with people about Star Trek Discovery was that it's a show that's so different from Star Trek. Why didn't they just create something all their own and tell this story? Well, it was because exactly that there's a commercial appeal associated to the brand Star Trek that they wanted to be able to start out with and bring in viewers. There's nothing wrong with that. And it's kind of like the new Star Wars movies, the J.J. Abrams and the Rian Johnson and whatnot, that are just
bad.
I'll say
bad.
Incoherent is the word that I tend to use. I don't dislike them. I think the second one was a great carnival ride. It just wasn't a film. And the third one was so butchered by coherent moments, by coherent character moments, except for who was the baddie in them? I can't even, Kylo Ren. He was the only one who had consistent character moments from the first film to the last. So you kind of go, okay, so why did we focus on the good guys? Why didn't we make a completely dark version of the Star Wars universe and just focus on Kylo Ren? It was clear, as JJ has recently acknowledged, that we really had no game plan. Yeah, it showed.
Oh, it's horrible. They're horrible.
And I think it ended up hurting the brand more than Disney would ever acknowledge. But
with Disney's involvement in any look, the rat gets what he wants. There's no doubt about it. And Disney's hands in any of those properties has always been issues to me. I'm a comic book guy. I love my comic books. And that's when you were saying, like, knowing a character and then seeing somebody mess with it. I've had this conversation 100 times with people about comic book characters that I'm like, they wouldn't do that. That's not that character. That's nothing about that character. That's not even close to what that character would be involved in. And people will say to me, well, we talked about the Podfather earlier. Him and I've had this conversation 100 times. He's like, well, the movies aren't made for us. They're made for other people, for the general audience. And I'm like, I'm sorry. The general audience doesn't get to see this movie unless I love it and I tell them how great it is. They don't have any interest. Those characters are my characters that they're coming to see. It's like I equate that with the new thing in Hollywood is the ultra attractive, over the top, beautiful woman, or the guy who's, got muscles on top of his muscles, like the old Popeye cartoons, who likes to tell everyone, well, I was a geek in school. I was just a geek. No, nobody liked me. Shut up. Shut up. Everything you're saying is a lie. The only one of those guys that it is true is, what's his name that played Superman most recently?
Henry Cavill.
Henry Cavill. And the only reason that it's true about Henry Cavill, that he's a big gamer, is he actually almost missed the audition for Superman for that role because he was in the middle of playing a video game. And he was like at some point where he was like crushing it and almost missed his audition completely. And he did the audition. And I think even the callback, he was like, didn't answer the phone for the callback because he was playing a video game. So I'll give you that one. But the rest of them, when it's like, what the heck is her name? Not Theron, but one of those like beautiful women is like, I was the geek in high school. I was, and stop.
Yeah, I find that increasingly hard to believe. There are others though, like Zachary Levi is clearly a comic book aficionado. Ben Affleck is clearly a comic book aficionado.
But he wasn't.
Dwayne Johnson, for all of his claiming he's a comic book aficionado, I don't think he is. I think he had comic books that he followed.
Right.
So, and those kinds of things, that's where you go, I agree with you. Hey, I would rather have somebody who's at least familiar with the material because they can do some justice to what the character originally stood for, maybe what the character stands for today, and perhaps then what the studio wants to turn it into. It's that age-old story that Nicolas Cage told when he wanted to do the Superman Returns movie. And they were doing shoots and whatnot just to kind of test the ideas of what they were doing. And the Warner Brother executive, I think as he relates to the story, came on the set and said, well, do we have to have Superman wearing a cape? He looks much better without the cape. And you kind of go, dude, do you even know this character if that's your input as an executive? I get you don't have to be overly familiar with any individual superhero, but to come onto a Superman set and suggest, oh, the character would be much better on the screen without a cape. No, you don't know the character. Leave the character to the people who are trying to develop an idea that's associated to the character. Don't try and come in and say, oh yeah, oh, and by the way, could we make him a woman? I don't have any problem with Warner Brothers and J.J. Abrams now saying, hey, we want to do an iteration of Superman where he's black. No problem with that whatsoever, because in the comics, that's in there.
That's real.
Right, exactly. There is a reason that could be done and explored on the silver screen. No problem with it whatsoever.
None.
But all of a sudden saying, oh, yeah, the Superman shouldn't be wearing a cape. Okay, no, there's a disassociation there. You're no longer talking about Superman. You're talking about a completely different character. He is the cape. He 100%. Is the cape. He's the cape. He's in tights. Yeah, I'm sorry. I like the underwear on the outside. I know we don't get it anymore, but
it has a history on the outside. It has a history. It goes back to the old carnival weightlifter guys. But that kind of goes into what I wanted to talk to you about, because there's one property I have owned in DVD, VHS, digital download, and every time if I'm ever just sitting around and want to watch something, I will turn on David Lynch, Dune,
Okay.
1984. The long version's almost 3 hours long. Phenomenal movie, but I almost feel like, and it kind of gets into like, do you know the property? Do you know what this is about? Is a great part of this, because that's a great example of a story where um, David Lynch took liberties with things in the original 1984 version that were not in the book. Like, for look, spoilers, came out in 1984, folks. I cannot help you if you do not know anything about this. I will tell you to go watch it. But like, the weirding modules is not in Hebert's book. It's not part of the book. The weirding way is a martial art, and they only make reference to it in the movie one time, and that's when Jessica is captured by Stilgard in the cave with Paul. This tell you how much I know this movie, Ed. With Paul, and she tells him, "You can get rid of the girl, we'll keep the boy." And when he goes to do something, she flips Stilgard around and puts a blade at his neck. And he goes, "If you can do this to the strongest of us, you're worth your weight in 10 men's water. We'll keep her." So, but that was the only time you hear about the weirding way as a martial art.
Mm-hmm.
Have you ever look? And I will tell anyone: have you ever, Ed, tried to read the original Dune book by Hebert?
Oh, have I?
Yes.
I've tried twice, and anytime it comes up, I explain this to people. I've got a rule.
Try.
There you go. As a reader, I have a rule that says if I can get over 100 pages, then I continue and I finish the book. I've never been able to get past that 100-page mark with Dune twice, and it's because there's such a present download of information that takes place in those pages. I've read some science journals and science books that don't even have as much information in 100 pages as I felt was being necessary for me to understand Dune. My 2 cents on the greater universe of Dune, because as I said, I've only tried to read the first one. I've thumbed through some stuff that people have passed along to me, but I've never invested any serious time in it. Is that Dune is a franchise best talked about by people who know it.
Yes.
You know Dune, you can wax on for hours about the property, the universe, the worlds, the families, the characters. You can go on, and because I've listened to people do this, I've got a few friends who are heavy Dune aficionados, and I've listened to them. I sit on the outside of it going, okay, can you explain to me then this of the movie? Can you explain to me that? Can you explain to me this relationship? Because I'm detached from it. I don't get it.
Oh, it's wild. Well, Frank Hebert, for those of you that don't understand what Ed and I are talking about, Frank Hebert's book Dune, in the first pretty much almost physically half of the book, he fleshes out an entire political system, planets, leadership, who they are, where they're from, why they're in the positions they're in, how they got there. He fleshes everything out.
What they ate for breakfast.
Oh, it's all there. And then you get into this other side of it, of the battles and the war. And for those of you that haven't watched the new Dune, which is phenomenal visually, probably the single most beautiful movie I have ever seen. The colors, the action, amazing. But you should go read. And if you're a reader, Ed, I'll tell you, get the comic book version because it's easier to read, and get the comic book version of House Atreides.
I saw that there was. Is that a prequel?
It is actually about Duke Leto as a boy. And you remember when
Oh,
you kept seeing the bullhead, and the
uh-huh,
bullfighter?
uh-huh.
That references his father.
Okay,
And that's one I won't spoil.
okay,
I tell people, if you watch, I promise you, if you go read House Atreides, the comic book series, and as you're reading it, you're just gonna go, son of a bitch, son of a.
mhm,
That's what that meant, because I was so surprised. They put a ton of information in that movie that relates to House Atreides that you wouldn't know if you didn't read it. Like,
okay,
it's because it also, in House Atreides, you find out the real history of where Duncan, Idaho comes from, and
okay.
why Duncan hates the and they call it, they're not, you
Wait,
notice
the
they're,
Fremen?
no, the Hurricanes. They didn't call them Harkonnens. Did
Oh,
you notice that in the
Harkonnens,
movie? They
right?
called them the Hurricanes, not the Harkonnens.
Oh, I thought they called them the Harkonnens.
Harkonnens is what they call them in David Lynch's movie.
Okay.
In the new movie, I don't even know who the director is. They called them the Hurricanes.
And in Villeneuve's,
Is it
the
Villeneuve's?
director of the new, yeah, Villeneuve, yeah.
They changed it, but I, folks, I promise you, it is stunningly beautiful movie,
Hmm.
and done in such a way that, and a person I respect their geek knowledge, Mitchell Hatlock, posted. He was like, "Oh, it was so boring. I needed more action. I liked the David Lynch. David Lynch is great because he takes all parts of it and just crams it into one movie, and you get the whole thing."
Hmm.
Do you know who did the best version though? But it was the worst visual, the best storytelling of it.
Are you talking about the sci-fi version?
Yes,
Yeah, yeah, I love the sci-fi version. I love it.
it's the
I
most
have
accurate.
I have very few qualms with it. There were some parts at the end where I thought, it felt rushed, but uh, they, clearly they had committed to a certain length, right?
Right.
So, okay, I get, yeah, you've probably pre-cut some of this stuff, and you realize, oh, where this has got to be what, a 6-hour event? I think it was.
Yeah, it was a movie, like, made for TV movie event.
Yeah. So in that respect, you kind of go, okay, I get you probably had to, trim some stuff down, and that might have meant that the ending was going to feel a little rushed. Um, I know with Lynch's version, because I've read a ton about it. Um, I know that he didn't have say on the final cut, which is something he's regretted his entire professional career. And who can blame the guy? They hacked up. I think his version was just over 3 hours. I know that he produced a 4 hours of film, over 4 hours of film. His cut was somewhere a little over the 3 hour mark, is what I've read. They cut it down to, what is it now? Was it 220? I think is what it ended up being.
Right. If you
It,
if you get
and
the one, it's like 2 hours and change. But
yeah,
there is the extended version is out there.
yeah, the extended version he's very upset with.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah, but again, I'm going off of what I've read.
No, but please tell me.
He was upset with because some of the scenes they put back, if I understood this correctly, were not. Uh, you know how a director will film something maybe 3 times, so that way he has 3 different takes that he can use. He disagreed with the choices that they made of the cuts that were reinserted into the film.
Hmm.
So if you're the director, if you're the one who's trying to cultivate a vision and do so honestly, and you realize, oh, okay, well, the way this particular scene plays out with, let's say, Paul and his mother, um, now that I see it in the greater construction of things, I realize, hey, it would probably work better if I soften Paul's tone in this take and let mom be the dominant character. If you've made that creative decision as a storyteller, and then the studio, for all intents and purposes, decides, oh, I like it better with this other one because that way we're pushing a faster pace. As a storyteller, nothing will tick you off more
Oh, I bet.
than somebody else saying, well, yeah, we disagree with your choices here. So,
What's the
though,
Snyder cut?
what's that?
The Snyder cut.
The Snyder cut.
Justice League. Snyder cut.
Oh, yeah, exactly. It's the
That's
exact
a
same
perfect
thing.
example.
You look at the Josh Whedon butchery,
Oh,
and then you watch what Zack Snyder had intended. That Warner Brothers said, no, too long, we can't do this, despite the fact that they had originally told him prepare two films, a part one and a part two, that they kind of pulled out on him last moment. Well, he clearly shot what could be two films there.
oh, absolutely.
So it's not his fault that now, and again, with the tragedy that happened in his life that took him away from working on the final cut. But look, the studio was perfectly happy in bringing Josh Whedon in and allowing him to reshoot stuff, and allegedly he reshot about 75% of it. And then again, if you're a purist and you go and you look at what Zach did, you go, what? Why wouldn't you release this?
Zach's movie's
What?
amazing.
Why wouldn't you give this a chance to soar the way the director intended? And Villeneuve is kind of the same way with his cut of Dune, because um, I've got problems with the Lynch one, and a lot of it relate to the way the story is told, with the constant voiceovers.
See, I
Voiceovers
love
always
that voiceover.
it has the effect of pulling me out of the action.
Really?
It puts a hurdle in front of what's happening organically on the screen, because I've now got to decide, okay, wait a minute, what was the context of what he's telling me? Why did he feel it necessary to tell me something that I can already see for myself on the screen? I'd rather see it than have it told to me. So that's where I struggle a little bit with the Lynch cut. Villeneuve, his version, I agree with you 100% in terms of the visuals, in terms of the way it was, the way everything was presented. It's as brilliant a film as quite possibly we'll see in our lifetime.
You get
In
one
composition.
of these. Ed, this is for you.
Composition.
I
in
agree
composition. I've got problems with how he dissects some of the characters and some of the casting choices, but those are the things I think any of us might have with any film we see.
Right.
Oscar Isaacs, I don't know. But my honest opinion after watching it was he was way too young for me to buy into him being, one of these galactic rulers of this universe. I didn't believe it. The Timothy Chalamet, I think is how it's pronounced. He was fine, but the real meat of Paul's growth as a character, we didn't see any of that stuff. Hey, cats, daddy's on the internet.
We'll get my cats. They can have a whole conversation together.
Your cat would be busy. I got 9.
I have 2.
Yeah, all mine are rescues that were strays, and I've got one who just pretty much hangs up here on the couch, and the others just
I want to go back to the Lynch for a second. So
yeah,
and I actually missed the thought dialogue, the overlays in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect example is the scene, and if you guys haven't seen this, I'll tell you. So the director of the new one, his name again is
Villeneuve. I've heard it different ways, but yeah, something like
Villeneuve.
Mm-hmm.
I give him high 5 credit for taking from the David Lynch some scenes that are almost word for word.
Mm-hmm.
He has scenes like perfect example, and this is where I was thinking about when you were talking about the overlaying voice stuff, and I really want to dive into that for a second.
Mm-hmm.
The scene where Duncan comes in, which is played by by Thanos, by Goonies. What the hell is his name? He played Thanos. I can't think of his name right now. I'm so horrible with this.
Oh, we talking about Aquaman?
No. That's
Or are you talking the original?
You're talking Jason Momoa. He played Thanos. God, I don't know why my brain isn't working.
Oh, Jason Brolin?
Thank you, Jason.
Or James
James
Brolin?
Brolin. James Brolin.
Yeah.
Yes, folks. Two grown men trying to remember another man's name. We can't do this shit, and we like this stuff. But James Brolin walks in and he plays Duncan, and he looks at him and he goes, "You know, it's time. It's time for training." He's like, and as soon as he starts talking, he's like, "I'm not in the mood." That's directly from the movie. And then the David Lynch, and then they start fighting, and he's like, "I would have bled. I would at least gave you a good scar." He repeats that. It's almost word for word. There's many scenes, but what was missing that I really wanted to see was when he walks in and Duncan goes, "You had your back to the door. A Harkonnen spy could have come in here." And he says, "I knew your steps as you were walking down the hall." And he goes, "Those could have been mimicked." In the original, there's a voice overlay, and it's actually, I can't think of his name. He's the military genius. And he makes the comment to him and he goes, you hear him over the overlay go, "I think he would have." And those little thoughts like that, I was missing that. I really was, like, because I felt like it gave the characters a little more as they were all interacting with each other. You kind of had a feeling of what are they thinking when this person says that. So from seeing the original, I was waiting for their thoughts on when somebody made a comment.
Okay.
So so I find that interesting. Like, you took it as a distraction. I took it as more information about what the character's history was, or what they felt about it, what was happening during a scene. Because if we read a book, in the book, you'll have the dialogue, and then you'll have some section where it'll say, "And Jones thought about this, and Smith thought about that."
Right.
We got those thoughts.
Right. Well, and that's the fundamental difference between telling your story as a novel and telling your story visually. Visually, you've got a much broader bag of tricks you can pull from. You've got technique, you've got screen techniques, you've got crossovers, you've got wipes, you've got split screens, you've got narration that you can add, you've got music, so on and so forth. When you're reading a novel, it's just you and the author. Especially in the best books, it's him or her, the author, telling you directly, the reader, everything he or she wants you to know about this particular scene. That's a huge difference between the book and the film, which is why I've always said films are inferior stories from the novels. That doesn't mean they're bad. That just means it's not a personal experience. It's a completely different form of communication. Interpersonally, a book is touching you. It's connecting with you on so many levels. A film, it's a communal experience. It's everybody in the room. It's everybody in the theater. It's not just you. And so, those things that I may find distracting, you find encouragement from them. That's just that's why that's part of why I write reviews, is that my whole point in penning a review is to tell you what my experience with it was about. Back in college, to throw in this perfect example, I wrote a paper on every film that has probably written dozens of papers on Citizen Kane. It's clearly it's not a science fiction film. There's nothing fantasy about it, but it's a film that speaks to people on incredibly different levels. I wrote a paper saying, you know what, the film Citizen Kane, the big trick for me is that Citizen Kane, the film, it's not about Kane. It's about the people who knew him. You learn more about how they live their lives. You learn more about what they take as positives and negatives from their individual lives than you ever do about Kane. Kane, if you look at all the individual pieces, Kane ends up being what I call a chimera. He's not one definable thing. He's many things. And because of that, I postulated in my paper that Kane was never meant, the film was never meant to be about him. It was meant to be about the people that he knew. So, at the end of the conference, because it got selected and I had to go present it and so on and so forth. The complaint that was lodged by another young paper presenter was that, well, how do you know that's what Orson Welles said with the film? And I said, well, you missed my whole point. it isn't what he wanted me to take from it. It's what I took from it.
Right.
This is my opinion of what the film means. I can't speak to what Orson Welles wanted with the film, and quite frankly, he's spoken so much about the film, some of it contrary to what he said before, that I don't know, much like Kane, that I can learn anything from what he's said over the years. But I can tell you what the film means to me, and that's the whole point of my paper. So, that's the difference between, for me, film and a book. If you and I were to read the same book, we would more than likely come away with, I don't know, 60, 80% of the same impressions. We would come away with, oh, okay, here was the high point of the book. Here was the low point of the book. Here were the better characters. Here were the better moments. I liked how I liked these passages, how the author chose to tell the story this way. Whereas with film, gosh, we might be lucky to have 20 to 30% in common, because our individual experiences are going to lead us to different conclusions about what the film really says and how it speaks to you. Using all those techniques, using all those tools, we still might say, hey, it was a kick-ass experience, much like I'd agree that this version of Dune is visually, as I said, you're going to be hard-pressed to come up with another epic like that in our lifetime. The closest, that I could come to in the immediate future would be Denis Villeneuve's other Blade Runner 2049.
That was another beautiful.
It's another film that it's all about the visuals. And what do you take from the visuals? The story is fairly paper thin, but then again, so was the original Blade Runners. It didn't have the kind of depth that maybe Lynch's version of Dune had, right? There were several different layers at play there. But again, my issues with the current version of Dune just relate to the fact that, there's really no villain, not like what you needed to start the universe out on the right foot. The villain appears in the background. It's much like, George Lucas was asked, well, hey, why did you start telling the Star Wars films with A New Hope? And his answer was, because most of what happens in the first trilogy is political shenanigans. It's the diabolical plotting of putting these pieces in place for the next trilogy. So you go, oh, okay, who wants to sit down for 3 hours with Dune with a cerebral story where you really don't get to know the villain? That's tough.
I guess you're right. Yeah, you really don't know.
Every good story, protagonist, antagonist. How do they come together? That's when Dune sails. That last 45 minutes of the film is epic. It's epic. But then you've got this added on moment where the film kind of ends just when Paul's life's getting interesting.
Well, that was the sequels that should have been made, but Sci-Fi Channel made the sequels based on the book. And so you get Children of Dune and all the rest of the books.
Right. Oh, yeah, but I'm talking about the current.
Oh, yeah, no.
Even though Dune is advertised as part one, it's the same thing.
Oh.
You and I both know the good stuff is going to happen now.
Right. Well,
the real good stuff, what draws people into liking a character or hating a character, is what Paul's story is from here on.
Yes.
It's not the setup.
No.
It's not this film. It's not the first 2 hours. The first 2 hours of this film are going to be negligible compared to what happens in his life after this. This is the good stuff. But that's why you have to go, well, whose idea was it to structure the film this way, to only give you 2 films? Clearly, this is potentially a 3-film property.
Yes.
Should mirror what they did with the original Lord of the Rings with Peter Jackson.
Thank you.
But unfortunately, I guess Warner Brothers just didn't think that was the way to go.
I've said that so many times after I watched this, and then I found out that it was going to be other parts. I was like, did you not take a page out of Peter Jackson's book and go, if we're going to do this, we film the whole thing, every movie, they all have a stopping point, and we put them in the can and we release them later. Nobody's aged, nobody quits, nobody dies, nobody changed lives, nobody turns around and says, well, I don't want to be in the movie anymore, so I've got to change actors, which really won't work because you've got somebody else. Peter Jackson was a genius at that. Everybody thought he was a madman. How can you do this? But it shows that it was the right move to make. And if you're going to make an epic trilogy of a long form story like this, you have to do it this way. You have no other choice. This is the only way to do it. And they just released, what was it, yesterday? They've greenlit the second movie.
Yeah.
But again, so you greenlit the second movie. Why not just, if you're going to do 3 parts, I don't know, Ed, maybe you do, you're well more informed than I am. Why not just do them all and get it done?
That would have been the smart thing. The odds are, the only explanation I could even offer, it's entirely speculative, but it's that Warner Brothers doesn't exactly have a great track record at the box office in the last, 5 to 10 years. They've been struggling as a studio. And I think some of the decisions they've made on films that they thought were going to be big were not anywhere remotely producing the box office they had anticipated. And so they might have been a little gun shy when they said, hey, here's this, let's face it, here's this hard sci-fi property.
Absolutely.
That doesn't exactly have a great track record at being adapted for mass consumption. And hey, we've got this great director. He's got a pretty solid cast he wants to bring in. It's going to be expensive. I think they were gun shy and said, okay, let's do one and see how it does. Now, on a property like Dune, you can't go halfway. That's why I said, I'm going to read 100 pages of a book. If I can't get into it in 100 pages, I realize this book probably doesn't speak to me on a level that I want to continue with it, right? We're human. That's just how we are. A property like Dune, if you're going to go half-ass and hope that the returns on the first one warrant greenlighting the second one, all I can say is thank goodness it did, because now the story can get really good. The only problem I have with anything the director has said about part 2 is he's on record in an interview as saying it's going to be Zendaya, that the actress who plays the love interest.
Right.
Yeah, it's going to be her film.
The second one?
Yeah, and you kind of go, okay.
She was never that important.
Yeah, hold the phone. She's essentially a love interest. She's a catalyst for Paul to kind of make a change in his life. But to say that part 2 is going to be all about her, okay, so then there's going to be 3. How many parts are you going to film if you're going to give her what essentially could end up be a whole film hers? And why? You're going to have to make up all kinds of content to
now,
justify.
Is Hebert's son involved? Is Hebert's son involved? Do you know?
I don't know.
Because he's talk about a genius. He took Dad's stories and he's been writing. There's a lot more than the original 3 books. His son has written books about the story. That's where House Atreides comes from. His son wrote House Atreides and gives you that backstory. All we can say, and I think if you haven't figured it out, Ed and I both give this you need to go watch it. Go enjoy this. It is the ending. I will tell you, it's a very, it's a ending where you go, son of a bitch. I needed more.
Yeah, it's just it's a weird break.
Right. It doesn't fit.
When you look at take any film that's more than one part, or any saga, whether it be Star Wars, Lord of the Rings, take even Back to the Future. Because that was 3 films. Granted, it wasn't planned out that way. It was planned as 1 and then 2 and 3. But the point is, when you experience those films individually, you go, oh, okay, this is a natural stopping point.
Right.
Because what happens next is going to propel that film and these characters into that unique and new set of circumstances. This one ends and you're like, Okay, is there going to be an after the credits scene?
Right.
Is there going to be something that kind of gives me a hint of where they're going with this? Because I don't, that's why I won't spoil that for anybody who hasn't seen it. But I agree with you wholeheartedly. It's the kind of film that even if you figure it was, even if you reach the decision it was a failure, I, you and I were two different people. We could like the same films, we could like different films. Even if you think this film is a failure, you can't tell me it wasn't worth watching
Absolutely.
because the visuals are amazing. Yeah, I understand you might have had some problems with some characters, and you might have said, "Hey, couldn't the Aquaman guy been in here longer?" Yeah, it would have been great. But you know what? That's not the story. The story is this.
I
And
love
if
that you
and
call
again,
Jason Momoa the Aquaman guy.
yeah, yeah. Can't the Aquaman hang around? Can he take
Did
his
you get
shirt off with the
Aquaman on the
ladies?
desert? Oh, I didn't realize that. We had Aquaman on a desert planet.
Yeah, that was the
I didn't
first
even
thing I
catch
thought
that.
was, holy crud, he's going from the oceans, and you can't get any drier than
Did you notice
Dune.
his beard was shaved?
Yeah, he had three different facial hairs. He
Yeah,
had the long one, then he
mhm.
had this kind of groomed one, and then he had none.
Yeah, that was, like, all part of it. That was actually a big thing before the movie was, the fact that Jason Momoa shaved his facial hair for this because that's, like, kind of his signature thing. He's
Yeah.
also in, and we could and I love talking to other people who love sci-fi like I do, and we could break down sci-fi versus fantasy versus, sci-fi horror, like, when you said you did horror. Anyone who doesn't understand, like, the movie Aliens is a sci-fi horror film. It is not just a sci-fi film.
Right.
Um,
Yeah.
I would love to get into have you watched See yet on Apple TV? See,
Oh no.
SEE?
Uh-uh.
I will tell you right now, see I love dystopian futures. I love
Okay.
dystopian movies. I don't know if you're into that or not, but anything that kinda gives you the dystopian future kinda thing, I'm
Hmm.
very into. See, SEE on Apple TV. I promise you
Is
something
that the
that
one with Momoa?
with Momoa
Okay.
is the most creative, most original, uh, visually and emotionally appealing that you will have probably seen in a minimum last 10 years, possibly 15, 20 of a
Okay.
sci-fi nature. Like I haven't felt this strong about a show since, and I'm a Walking Dead fan. I still watch Walking Dead. I watch all the spinoffs of Walking Dead. Uh, I can't wait for the actual movie that's going to come out. I love Robert Kirkman. I think he's a genius with his information. I haven't felt this strong about a series, which is C, since watching Walking Dead when it came out.
Hmm.
It's
Okay.
that good. It's on Apple TV. So we're gonna get right. We got to put a bow on it, though, Ed. We
All
got to
right.
we got to keep them wanting more. Because guys like you and because at I wanted to ask you. Well, I'm going to ask it anyway. We'll ask one more question because I got to see what Ed's answer is. Is there
Okay.
anything from a reading standpoint or anywhere anything you've seen that you? Because see, I have so many things like I love the movie Nightbreed. If you've never seen that, that's a horror fantasy right there.
Yeah. Mid '80s.
Late '80s, early '90s.
Yeah.
Nightbreed. That's an example of one that like didn't know it was a short story until I read the short story and it really needed sequels. Is there anything out there that you've read recently or seen recently that you say, "Hey, this needs a movie or a TV series," or maybe even one that you say, "Hey, I know this is coming up." Like they say Anne Rice Vampire Chronicles. I keep seeing it popping up
Hmm.
that the Vampire Chronicles is getting a series, which I find very interesting because I've read many of the books about like the witching hour books and about the Talamasca and all that. Uh, y'all didn't know I could read. I sound like an imbecile. That's that mid Atlantic accent of mine, but I promise you, I know how to read. Is there anything out there that you would say, hey, this needs a movie?
Hmm. It's tough, and it's tough for a personal reason. One of the things that I stress even on my website when I'm contacted by people because I had a column up the other day because somebody seems like once every 3 months I get an email request from somebody who reads, let's say, fairly regularly at the site, and they'll say, "Hey, what are your top 5 things to see right now?" I always respond to them privately, but this time, because now that I've been doing this for about 8 years, I decided I'd pen a column. So in the column, I said, I don't traditionally do that because I'm the kind of viewer, I'm the kind of reader, I'm the kind of consumer that I rarely like something more than once. In other words, if I like to hop on your point about The Walking Dead, first iteration, I think, is a pretty brilliant show 90% of the time. Second one, huge disappointments. Third one, it's like a root canal. I have hope because they've said that the next iteration is going to for TV is going to be Tales of the Walking Dead, and it's going to be some independent standalone storytelling. All the episodes are supposed to be somewhat independent. There might be some ongoing continuity, but otherwise they're going to do a lot of independent stuff. See, that kind of stuff intrigues me. So I hesitate to recommend anything wholeheartedly. What I will say is that when it comes to writing, you could probably hire a team to look at everything that Bradbury has done, everything Philip K. Dick has done. As good as Isaac Asimov is, a lot of it for me just doesn't translate well to a personal story. It's brilliant writing, but it's just, for me, visually it doesn't work. I have the same problem with fantasy stuff too. I had a friend who recommended me. Oh my God! After the Lord of the Rings stuff was so huge. Oh, you got to read The Wheel of Time. And I said, okay, what? Yeah, there's a TV show coming. What makes The Wheel of Time worth reading? Oh, this, that, and the other. And I said, okay, but we already had that. I've already seen those characters. Oh yeah, but there's this, that, and the other. So I put aside my biases and I read it. And I said, after reading it, I sat down and I said, yeah, no, it just wasn't for me. I've seen all this elsewhere. And just because somebody takes it and puts it all together in one work doesn't make it worthwhile for me. But I will say that, like I said, those few authors I mentioned, almost anything I've read of theirs is great. The other thing that I'd love to see a movie of, I don't know how you do it, is Alfred Bester's The Stars My Destination. It's just a brilliant novel. What's that?
I said I don't know that one.
Yeah, The Stars My Destination. In the 90s, somebody tried for a while to get it adapted for Schwarzenegger, and he'd probably be the right person for the role. It has a lot of feelings similar to Total Recall, but it's entirely a different story. It's about a guy who's essentially lost in space. He doesn't quite know why, and he spends the bulk of the novel trying to figure out the who's, the where's, the why's, and everything.
Oh, that's cool.
And it's the kind of novel that, like any good novel, once you know it, it's hard to talk about it without spoiling it for people who haven't read it. So that's why I'd say, I'd give that my recommendation. As for TV shows, have you seen Dark on Netflix? Dark.
Is that the zombie
Swedish
one?
Nope. It's a sweet. The zombie one is Black Summer. Well, if you're thinking.
No. Dark is Dark the one. Now you'll tell me if I'm right or wrong.
Mm-hmm.
The very first episode, the guy's driving into the town, and all of a sudden there's like this weird situation. He blames it on a bee sting, and he's allergic to bees. No, then I've never seen it. Nope. Fuck it, I lied.
Dark is to explain Dark. It's a time travel story that has very little time travel in it, and that's because the events take place in different time periods. People do travel to different time periods through, let's say, a fault line in our universe that allows them to go just to specific 33 years this way.
That's it. 33. That's
or
the
that
number.
way. 33. And so it's some genius. It's 3 seasons long. Seasons 1 and 2 are about as brilliant sci-fi fantasy
Really?
storytelling has ever been done. Season 3, and this is where I lose a lot of fans on my website, and I go, season 3, it was just garbage. It was they had the right idea. They knew how they wanted it to end, but it seemed like they came up with let's call it a 2-hour movie idea to end the series successfully, and then spread it out for maybe 8 or 9 or 10 episodes. And you go, yeah, it dragged on just too long. Brilliant idea, executed poorly.
Gotcha.
For 2 of the 3 seasons, though, you won't find anything as compelling and as interesting as the ideas, the way they roll them out there. There are some, and if you like dystopian dramas,
I love it.
You want to watch it, because that's essentially the whole point of season 2. Is, like I said, they go 33 years into the future, they find out things didn't quite go the way they planned, and Earth is in a crap hole. And it's just told from the point of view of this one town, somewhere. As I said, I think it might be Norway instead of Sweden, but it's brilliant, and I think you'd enjoy it.
See, that's right up my alley. So there's your recommendations, folks. I think I'm gonna have to go check out Dark. That sounds like it's right up my alley. I've always loved dystopian movies. I think it started with Dawn of the Dead. I loved Dawn of the Dead. I loved Mad Max. There were so many of them that I watched. Night of the Comet as a kid. What's the other? There was one that I can't remember. There's like 2 weird ones. One was they drove this desert vehicle across. They were going to somewhere, and the vehicle had 3 sets of 3 set tires, so they were set on a triangle. That was the big thing I remember about.
Damnation Alley.
There you go, Damnation Alley.
Damnation Alley, yeah. George Papard, Michael Jan Vincent.
There you go.
That's a great. That's a little formulaic as dystopian things go, but that's a great example of how sci-fi was done in the mid 70s.
Absolutely. And that was great. When I remember the biggest scene also in that was the cockroach scene in Las Vegas, where they were like attacked by cockroaches, because that was what survived.
That and scorpions.
Yes,
that and scorpions. Yeah.
I mean, I remember, like, I grew up on the sci-fi dystopian future. It was the 80s. The nuclear fallout was going to kill us all.
Yeah.
This is what we were going to be left with. This was going to be everything. I'm trying to think of any other ones that were big influencers on me. There was just so many. The other one that was, and I think, Ed, you and I could probably talk for hours on this, because I love space pirates, or Ice Pirates, the movie Ice Pirates, which is one of those ones that, unless you have like a jailbroke like Fire Stick, you can't find it anywhere. And I've sat back recently and watched it, and it was still just a great example of, in the 80s and 90s, they were looking for anything sci-fi they can come up with, anything dystopian they could come up with. That was the world we were all going to end up in. So it was almost like a training video for all of us to watch these things. It was great. I loved it. As always, folks, though, eventually we do have to pull the curtain on the bar. We have to, put the sign up. All the stools got to get pushed in. We all got to get ready to go. I'm going to tell you, go check out sci-fihistory.net. Sci-fihistory.net. It's spelled exactly how it sounds. Sci-fihistory.net. It is a phenomenal read. Go get your geek on. I'm going to plug myself for a minute, because that's what I do. November 14th, if you're in the capital region of New York, come to Albany Comic Con. We're going to be gotta love this. We're at the Polish Community Center. Hopefully somebody has gołąbki or pierogi or something along those lines. A little
food's going to
borscht.
be great.
A little borscht for me that they can bring to the table. I think and the Podfather will be with me. So we're getting the entire Earplug Podcast Network together. Anything you got coming up? Any shows you're going to be doing? Any sci-fi shows you're going to? Anything, Ed?
Nothing. I pretty much keep it to the web. Every now and then I get asked to do A, B, or C. I usually don't. I usually stick close to home, and so on and so forth. there's a big Comic Con usually in Phoenix every year, and I got invited to go there as press, but I just, like I said, I just don't. We could do a whole show on sci-fi fandom and what it's like to be part of this community. There's a lot of good. There's a lot of it's not so good, and so that's why I just kind of stick to myself. Politically, I tend to lean a little more to the right. A lot of people in this business lean a lot to the left. So I don't see eye to eye on things. That's why it says in my Twitter feed, under my profile, don't expect me to agree. That's usually where I get in trouble with directors or actors and so on and so forth. I don't challenge them, especially when it's about their work. Their work is their work. But when it comes to their telling me how I should live my life or how you should live your life or the kinds of questions you as an interviewer should ask and so on and so forth, no, that's my job. I don't tell you how to act, so don't tell me how, respectfully, to interview. That's why I avoid them.
Brother, well, we appreciate you coming on here as your first official. I hope it worked out. I hope you enjoyed yourself. You're a man after my own heart. I love talking to people that really know their stuff. I can geek out on stuff. There's a whole lot. There's so much we could keep going. But like I said, we got to pull the curtain on the bar. Nothing coming up for you, but there's, like you said, you're out in Phoenix. As always, and don't go disappearing on me when this is over. I'm going to kick us back down to the green room. We got a couple things to discuss. You get the last word there, good sir. And what is the last word as we're going out today?
Last word is science fiction and fantasy and horror are timeless. And if you are not a fan, you need to do a lot of serious introspection and find something to like in them.
Alrighty, folks, be sure to push your stool in.
This has been an Earplug Podcast presentation. Found on earplugpodcast.com, iTunes, SoundCloud, and wherever your favorite podcasts are found.